Thank you very much, John. With respect to coal, our most abundant resource in this country is coal. When you take the inventory of what's available to us for energy, it's coal. That's the most abundant resource we have. There are some who say, let's abandon the use of coal. I was on a roundtable discussion at the museum, and then Bill Clinton was in the discussion, and Al Gore, and there were Republicans and Democrats, George Pataki, and so on. Al Gore said 100% renewable energy by 2020. Well, that's nuts. There's no press here, are there? Yeah, I'm sorry. It's still nuts. We're not going to do 100% renewable. I mean, it's just not, that's not going to happen. Should we have more renewable? Yes, we should. But we need a future in which we continue to use our most abundant resource, and that's coal. So how do we do that? Well, we don't do it the way we used to. We're going to have to try to decarbonize coal. But as we talk about protecting our climate, you have to do targets in a way that meet the capability that we have. And if we're smart in establishing targets that allow us to use the science and the research and the technology to find ways to decarbonize coal, we'll be fine because we've got resources that will last hundreds of years. But if we set up a system of climate change, saying we're going to protect our environment, and ignore the reality of needing to use the most abundant resource, and set up targets that cannot be reached, the fact is we're going to have more trouble than we have now. We've got Jim Inhofe, who's a perfectly good guy from Oklahoma, and he thinks the issue of climate change and global warming is one huge conspiracy. There's no such thing, never has been, never will be. The human beings have very little impact on this planet, and so there's all the way from Jim Inhofe all the way to the other side. I mean, John McCain feels strongly that climate change is something that is urgently needed. Climate change legislation is urgently needed. So you have some Republicans and Democrats on all sides of this. And I think, let me just mention one thing, though. I do want to say to you, there are people in whose interest it is for us not to do a climate change bill, and I think there is going to be a climate change bill. It may not be this year, may not even have the votes next year. I don't even know, but I think there is enough science out there to suggest that something is going on. I recognize you're talking about, what, 3.5% of CO2 produced by humans that represents the change in the balance that could have substantial impact. I don't know all of that. I know enough science, and you do as well, to think that some really terrific scientists have some notions out there that should lead us to take at the very minimum, a series of no-regret steps in the right direction. So that if 10 or 40 years from now, we understand, well, we weren't right about that, but we did some things nonetheless that were helpful to the country. That's the very least we should do. I do think there are some in this debate that are able to gather completely worthless opinions from people who sell those opinions on the extreme side, perhaps of both cases, and then peddle it. And I would say to you, it does very little value, it has almost no value to embrace some people who are thoroughly discredited and bring that information to Congress to make your case. And you can find out quite easily who's discredited on both sides. I can tell you some people that are thoroughly discredited on the side of coal interests and others, who will write anything and say anything that's way out of bounds, demonstrably incorrect. So, you bring that stuff to Congress, it injures your case. But the same is true on the other side. Both sides do it. There's a lot of middle ground, mainstream thinkers who can give us a good balance of what they think is happening and what the consequences of it will be. Let me mention one other thing. The president included in his, his budget proposal about $600 billion of revenue from cap and trade, projecting zero allowances. First of all, we're not going to pass a cap and trade bill with zero allowances. You can't do that. You have to have very substantial allowances up front and then phase in. But second, the revenue of that, nearly $600 billion, is over here as a budget plug of revenue that could be used, for example, in health care. Can't do that. Excuse me. And so you're going to have to, if you have cap and trade and you have some sort of a system like that, you're going to have to use the revenue from it to offset the impact on consumers. And that's going to take almost all that revenue, in my judgment.